We're all gonna stay over, isn't that nice? I was dumbfounded by my mother-in-law's words right in front of me. My mother-in-law had come to my house without any notice. Behind her, there were 5 other women of her age, her friends. I had no idea she was coming today, and it was the first I'd heard of such a large group staying over. Seeing my stunned expression, my mother-in-law grinned and looked over at her friends behind her. Sorry about my slow daughter-in-law. Well, how long are you planning to make us stand in the doorway? Pressured to let them in by my mother-in-law, all I could do was frown in distress. Seemingly impatient, she forcibly stepped inside, at which point I pointed to something. Excuse me, mother-in-law, but about this. My name is Catherine, and I am currently a full-time housewife, 6 months pregnant. I had severe morning sickness, so I took maternity leave early and left the restaurant where I had worked for over 10 years. I had good relationships with my coworkers, so work was very enjoyable. I really wanted to work until the last minute, but my husband and colleagues advised against it. But I was filled with happiness. That's because, after 5 years of marriage, I was finally pregnant with our long-awaited child. When my husband and I met, we were both already 28 years old. We both liked children, but given our age, we tried not to get our hopes up too much. We worked hard, saved money, and looked forward to our annual trips as one of our greatest joys. Whether or not we had a child, we agreed to cherish these moments. And then, finally, we were blessed with a baby. However, almost as soon as I found out I was pregnant, my husband's long-term business trip was confirmed. He negotiated with his company, but due to business needs, he was deemed the most suitable candidate, and it was decided that he would stay out of town for about a year. So, I needed to get through daily life, prenatal checkups, and possibly even childbirth on my own. My husband was very worried, but in the end, he held my hand tightly and said, "I'll work hard and earn money for you and the baby." Since he was sending me living expenses during my leave, I could focus on housework. When I was feeling well, I did some part-time work to add to our savings. Some people might choose to go back to their parents' house to rest. However, my parents died in a car accident when I was young. All that was left were my sister, who is 3 years older than me, and myself. Because we were estranged from our relatives and there was no one to take us in, we both went to a foster house. Since then, we consulted each other about even the smallest things, never fought, and supported each other throughout our lives. My sister was always reliable, but after losing our parents, she became even more dependable. Even though she must have been incredibly anxious, she never shed a tear in front of me. My sister is already married and has children. She has her own happy life, so I didn't want to impose. On the other hand, my husband's father passed away a few years ago. He was the president of a food company and worked tirelessly until just before his death. My mother-in-law took over the company, and my husband became the vice president and executive director. Because my husband took over the visits to branch offices and partner companies for my elderly mother-in-law, I knew he traveled frequently even before we were married. Although we didn't have much time to spend together, I couldn't complain since we relied on my husband's income, especially since I got pregnant. However, I couldn't help but wonder if this long-term business trip was deliberate. Considering the company's personnel and the nature of the work, it was understandable that my husband was the most suitable candidate. But considering the timing and my mother-in-law's personality, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. This wasn't just because I was battling my ever-growing belly and changing physical condition daily. Unfortunately, I was aware that my mother-in-law disliked me. She had always been somewhat cold to me, but her harassment became even worse after my father-in-law's death, causing me stress. Being ignored was the norm, and whenever I visited her house, my shoes would be hidden, and cash would be taken from my wallet when I wasn't looking. Although it could only have been my mother-in-law, she never admitted to it as there was no proof. What? You're saying I'm a thief? Where is the evidence for that? Is my name written on the money? Or did you take a picture of me stealing it? Ha, you're really just a money-grubbing woman after my son's income. A terrible woman who seduced my adorable only son, used pregnancy as a shield to avoid working, and extorted money from my son. You said you don't have parents? Did you get disowned because of your bad behavior? It doesn't matter why, but do you think a woman raised in a foster house without parents is qualified to be my son's wife? Ah, so that's why you're accusing someone of stealing money. She spat out every possible aggressive word and tormented me. Furthermore, I was strictly forbidden to tell anyone about this. Try snitching to Tommy. I'm sorry to interrupt his hard work, but I'll get him fired and kick you out. How will you two survive without jobs, I wonder? Tommy is my husband. If I told my husband about the harassment from my mother-in-law, he would be fired, taken back to his parents' house, and I would be left penniless. My mother-in-law has an extreme personality, and it's not impossible that she would actually do it. I loved my husband, and I couldn't bear to take away the father of my child in my womb just because I offended my mother-in-law, so I endured it alone. Fortunately, our house and my in-laws' house are more than an hour's drive away, so we don't see each other very often. When I reached the second trimester of my pregnancy, the so-called stable period, my sister invited me on a short trip. Both my sister and her husband had the day off during the holiday, and they could leave their child with her husband. One of the main purposes of the trip was to report my pregnancy to our parents on their death anniversary. My sister considered my physical condition a top priority, arranged for plenty of rest time, and found a hotel that was comfortable even for pregnant women. When I called my husband to tell him about the trip, he told me to spread my wings and enjoy myself. I managed to cover the travel expenses with my own money without touching the living expenses. Because my physical condition changed drastically, I packed little by little for the trip, and I was ready by the day of departure. On that day, my sister was supposed to pick me up by car in the morning, and then we would head to the train station. As I was doing the final check of my luggage and anxiously waiting for my sister, the doorbell rang. Unable to suppress my excitement and joy, I opened the door, but it was not my sister, it was my mother-in-law. And behind her were 5 unfamiliar middle-aged women. What's with that dumbfounded face? We're staying here from today, so let us in. Excuse me? Everyone came from far away. Don't leave them standing outside, let them in quickly. Still unable to understand what my mother-in-law was saying, I stood there dumbfounded. Catherine, what are you doing standing there? Hurry up and make coffee for my friends. I thought you would be loafing around at home during the holidays, so I brought everyone to hang out with you. You should be grateful. When my mother-in-law said that, one of the women said, "It's a stable period, right? I was working until just before giving birth, but it's nice to be able to relax when your husband earns well. I'm so jealous." I was internally furious, but I couldn't deny it because I was indeed living on my husband's income. Nevertheless, it was strange for her to suddenly appear and bring her friends without notice. It was extremely inconsiderate, especially since it wasn't even her house. The women were friends from a class my mother-in-law attended, and they often interacted privately. This time, to deepen their friendship, they coordinated their holidays and planned a 6-day, 5-night girls' trip a week in advance. Apparently, my mother-in-law volunteered to host. Jess told us a lot about you. Even though you're pregnant, you're a perfect and capable wife. When we heard about the sleepover, you voluntarily offered to let us stay here, right? And with 3 meals a day. My mother-in-law made up the story, and to prevent me from escaping, she kept it a secret until the day of. I was quite bewildered by the harassment, which was on a different scale from before, and couldn't stand it anymore, so I appealed to my mother-in-law. Please look at this. What I pointed to was a travel bag placed at the entrance. It was not the amount of a day trip, and my mother-in-law twitched her cheeks. Before my mother-in-law could say anything, I said, "I'm very sorry, but I wasn't aware of any such arrangement. Actually, I am planning to go back to my hometown with my sister. We will be away from home for a while, so could you please take your things with you?" My mother-in-law was a little flustered, perhaps because she didn't expect me to argue. "Oh, I've been saying that for a month now, haven't I? It's your fault, Catherine, if you don't remember? You can go back to your hometown anytime because you're unemployed, so why don't you do it next time?" Perhaps because her friends were watching, she didn't get angry as usual. Sweat appeared on my forehead, and I forced a smile. I saw her friends whispering in the background and thought this was my chance, so I said more. It was decided a week ago that you would stay over, right? That means I wouldn't have known a month ago that I needed to make my house available, right? Could it be a misunderstanding on your part? I thought I might have said too much, but it was too late. My mother-in-law glared at me with a demonic expression, her temples throbbing. However, because there were people around, she didn't raise her hand. No matter what happens later, if I let her into the house now, it would be playing into her hands. So I kept arguing with her at the entrance. Let me in, make coffee, walk to the supermarket and buy a lot of alcohol. I was terrified of my mother-in-law and her friends, who were coming at me with an attitude that was unthinkable for guests visiting someone's home. They might force their way in from the entrance. Just as I was afraid of that, my sister arrived in perfect timing and looked surprised when she saw my mother-in-law and her friends. Maybe I looked terrible because she immediately joined the circle. Oh, are you Catherine's sister? What a coincidence! We are having a girls' party at Catherine's invitation today. Did you come to help by any chance? Wow, you're so considerate. No, I just came to pick up my sister. We are going out now, so I don't have time to entertain my sister's mother-in-law and friends. Could you please move out of the way because you are in the way? My mother-in-law was momentarily silent at my sister's clear words. However, she immediately started to speak to her friends in a mocking tone. Oh my, she says we're in the way. Even though she knows I'm Catherine's mother-in-law, she says we're in the way. I can't believe it. Her parents must have raised her poorly, huh? I think that's unbelievable even for me. You know you shouldn't say in the way to someone you're meeting for the first time, right? With all due respect, from my point of view, you're suspicious people who, despite my sister's repeated refusals, are forcing your way into her house, demanding coffee, and being unreasonable. Please go home. If you don't leave, I will report you to the police for trespassing. My sister did not flinch at all at the high-pitched laughter of my mother-in-law and her friends. When my sister clearly mentioned reporting to the police, my mother-in-law and her friends, their faces red with anger, came closer and started shouting. What do you mean by that tone? If you invite someone, it's natural to entertain them, right? You're such an infuriating woman, I can't believe it. Who do you think you are, threatening to report to the police? That's unbelievable, especially coming from someone who's a stranger. Even when confronted like that, my sister only glared at my mother-in-law and her friends with cold eyes. And then, the words of my mother-in-law and her friends began to imply insults and threats to harm me. Oh, I can't take it anymore. I'm scared to take care of my son's child with such a stupid woman. I wonder if I could avoid seeing my grandchild's face by giving a strong shock to this fat woman's belly right now? As vulgar laughter echoed, my sister, who had been expressionless until then, slowly narrowed her eyes. By the way, the biggest problem in such disputes is the he said she said argument. So, I have been recording everything since I came here. My sister showed her smartphone with a very refreshing smile. The screen displayed that it was recording, and the time was ticking in real time, clearly showing that it was recording. As I've been saying, please go home. It's a crime to not only not agree to this request from someone who is not even the homeowner, but also to target my sister's belly, who is the homeowner. Ignoring the stunned mother-in-law, my friends quickly made their excuses, saying, I didn't say anything. Yeah, I was just invited too. I had no idea Catherine was planning to go out. And scattered like the wind. By the time my mother-in-law came to her senses, her friends were quickly moving away from the house. Despite calling out for them to wait, my mother-in-law didn't even glance at me and instead ran off in their direction. My sister let out a deep sigh and carried my travel bag, which was left at the entrance, to the car. Why did you open the door? Even if you knew I was coming, you should have confirmed who the visitors were. What would have happened if those people were more impatient and careless? You have no idea. She scolded in an exasperated tone. I repeatedly apologized to her. Then, as we both fastened our seatbelts and started the car, my sister glanced at me. Were you being treated well by that lady? She doesn't seem like a kind mother-in-law at all. You're not alone anymore, you know? It's not good to be stressed during this time. Does Tommy know about this? I hope you haven't kept it from him. Ugh, you should explain everything over the phone now. She advised, fully aware of my tendency to not properly consult my husband. I clenched my smartphone and called my husband. But unfortunately, the call didn't go through. While waiting for a callback, I gradually began to tell my sister about the mother-in-law's behavior. How she didn't like me and treated me as an enemy, how she threatened to fire my husband, who is the president of the company, if I dared to consult him, and how she threatened to force a divorce and abandon me if I told my sister, who has her own family, thereby causing her trouble. Just recalling my mother-in-law's past actions made it impossible for me to hold back tears. My sister drove as smoothly as possible to minimize the bumps. However, perhaps due to the hormonal changes of pregnancy, I couldn't stop crying no matter how much I tried. Although I wanted to switch my mood to enjoy the overnight stay with my sister, my heavy heart showed no signs of lifting. Moreover, crying didn't provide any relief. Nevertheless, I had pretty much made up my mind. After this, even if I have to do it over the phone, I will inform my husband about everything to protect our unborn child. Given the stress caused by my mother-in-law's harassment, the one most affected is the baby. Yet, because of my weakness, I haven't been able to speak up, and as a result, I continue to expose myself to stress. Can I really become a mother? If I tell my husband, will my mother-in-law actually fire him, and if so, what will happen to our lives? The more I think about these worrisome thoughts, the deeper I sink into despair. Feeling a sense of relief from finally seeing my sister after so long, I let my emotions flow freely and started to cry, only to suddenly find it hard to breathe. I hurriedly tried to calm myself down, but contrary to my efforts, I felt increasingly nauseous and struggled to breathe. My throat and chest tightened, and by the time I realized I couldn't breathe, I started to panic. Then, a sharp pain shot through my abdomen, causing me to let out a raspy groan. "Catherine, are you okay? Hang on, I'm going to pull over." My sister shouted from the driver's seat as my vision began to blur. Feeling disappointed with myself for causing trouble again, Suddenly, everything before my eyes became bright and clear. I found myself staring up at a white ceiling, realizing from its height and color that it wasn't the interior of my sister's car. My gaze darted around, and I deduced that I was in a hospital, lying on a clean bed, apparently having been asleep. An N4 was hooked up to my arm, and a belt-like device was wrapped around my abdomen. Since no one was around, I pressed the nurse call button, and a nurse promptly came to my aid. From her, I learned that I had passed out due to hyperventilation. I was brought to the hospital by an ambulance my sister had called and was immediately admitted due to the risk of preterm labor. A device to monitor the baby's heartbeat was attached to my belly because I was diagnosed with a high risk of preterm labor. The risk of premature birth seems to increase with stress and intense exercise, and when I heard that, I could relate a lot. The household chores dumped on me by my mother-in-law, the barrage of verbal abuse, all of it seemed to be putting the baby in danger. I was told to be on absolute bed rest for a while, so as I was lying in bed, my sister and husband came to visit. While I was sleeping, my sister explained everything she knew to my husband. As soon as my husband saw my face, he collapsed on his knees, repeating how glad he was that I was safe. When he found out that the baby's heartbeat was confirmed to be fine, he shed tears and apologized to me. "I'm really sorry that this happened because I wasn't around. I bear some responsibility for not noticing sooner. I will take appropriate measures, so please wait a little longer." My husband then left the hospital room temporarily, leaving my sister and me alone. My sister took care of everything for me and even went home to bring me extra clothes and toiletries that weren't in my travel bag. "I've been your sister for many years, so I can guess where you keep your stuff and what you need." Just kidding, Tommy actually told me where everything was in a text. My heart was warmed by my sister's smile, and I apologized again for not being able to go on the trip. While we were talking, my husband came back. His face was red with anger, but he gradually calmed down and explained the situation. I told my mother over the phone that she needs to step down as CEO. She's been using her position to harass you, and even got her friends involved. Someone who does that doesn't deserve to be at the top of a company. Of course, she opposed it, but since she became CEO, the company's performance has been declining, and she lacks the qualities of a manager. She doesn't have the ambition to study and improve the company, and whenever she opens her mouth, she brings up the fact that she's the CEO, and if anyone opposes her, she immediately brings up my father's name and accuses them of being ungrateful. I've already discussed it with the other executives, and they agree. No matter how much she resists, I won't back down. I'll make sure everyone understands and hold a board meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, please don't worry, dear sister-in-law. I will protect Catherine and the baby. I apologize for the trouble. Seeing my husband apologize repeatedly to my sister, I was able to feel that everything would be all right if I left it in his hands. After that, my husband visited every day. During that time, his smartphone was constantly ringing, and he turned off the notifications, saying, "It's probably my mother." I was hospitalized for about a week, and I was able to rest my body thoroughly in an environment where I was protected from my mother-in-law. My health improved rapidly, and it was decided that I would be discharged, but since there was a chance of encountering my mother-in-law if I went home, I decided to stay at my sister's house for the time being. Around the time I was discharged, my husband returned from a business trip, and to be prepared in case my mother-in-law came, he decided to wait at home. Sure enough, my mother-in-law came to our house, but my husband tried to send her away. However, just as he was about to close the front door, she shouted, "My affair with Mr. Young from a client company has been exposed. Help me!" Curious, my husband listened to her story, and it turned out that my mother-in-law was having an affair with the president of a client company. She was about to be forced to resign as CEO, and in her desperation, she went to her lover for help. But for some reason, she went to his house at a time when his wife was there, and she was caught red-handed. Because of who was involved, the news inevitably reached the ears of people within the company. As a result, the affair with the president of the client company pushed my mother-in-law's dismissal. The executives, who had been hesitant to act because of the respect they had for my late father-in-law, were able to unanimously agree to remove my mother-in-law from her position as CEO, thanks to the discovery of her misconduct. In the end, my mother-in-law had to resign as CEO. I seemed to be out of her mind, as I hadn't received any calls on my smartphone recently. Thinking it might be safe to go home, I decided to return to my own house. Of course, I locked the doors and monitored the visitors, and to be safe, my sister came over during the daytime when my husband wasn't home. With the approval of my sister and husband, we made sure that I was never alone. One evening, I received a text from my husband saying he was about to head home, so my sister started preparing to leave. Just then, there was a loud banging noise from the direction of the balcony. Shocked and frightened, my sister and I cautiously pulled back the curtain, and to our surprise, my mother-in-law was there. She must have seen the lights on and thought I was home. Seeing my mother-in-law banging on the glass with bloodshot eyes, I felt my knees buckle. It's one thing for her to be at the front door, but to get onto the balcony, she would have had to climb over the fence. Where on earth did she climb up from? She was yelling something, but the windows of the balcony were made of thick glass for security purposes, so I couldn't understand what she was saying. I was stunned and could only stare at my mother-in-law as she continued to pound on the glass with a demonic expression. The glass wouldn't even crack from a woman hitting it with her bare hands. However, if she found the gardening shovel on the balcony, it would be dangerous. As I panicked, wondering what to do, my sister seemed to calm down. She took out the video camera she had brought just in case and started recording my mother-in-law's actions. While she was doing that, I called the police, and, realizing the gravity of the situation, I shakily contacted my husband. He had already left work and told me to hang in there for just a few more minutes. My sister continued to explain the situation to the police while holding me with one arm. The police arrived before my husband did, so my sister guided them from the front door to the balcony. When my mother-in-law saw the police officer through the window, she surprisingly climbed over the balcony railing and disappeared. Just as I thought she had escaped, the police quickly split up and ran in two directions. One went towards the balcony, and the other exited through the front door and circled around to the back. I was worried she might have gotten away, but that concern was quickly alleviated. It seemed that my mother-in-law had misstepped while climbing over the railing and was caught writhing in pain by the officer who circled around. She was taken into custody, and my sister handled all the questioning for me. I felt pathetic for relying on my sister so much, but I knew I couldn't just wallow in self-pity. I gathered my courage and explained everything to my husband when he got home. It turned out to be the right decision not to be alone, even for just a few hours. I get goosebumps just thinking about what might have happened if my sister wasn't there. In the end, my mother-in-law was arrested for breaking and entering. The recording my sister took of her threatening to hit my stomach helped our case, but since she didn't actually cause any harm, she couldn't be charged with assault. Instead, it seemed that they were going to charge her for trespassing on other residents' balconies to get to our room. My husband's company faced difficulties as the president was arrested, which negatively affected its performance and put them in a tough spot. However, my husband and the executives continued to respond sincerely, and thanks to the trust built by my father-in-law, they managed to keep the business running. My husband decided to become the president and make the company even better than it was during my father-in-law's era. On the other hand, I was relieved that my mother-in-law was no longer in my life, and I was able to safely give birth. Despite being told I was at risk for premature birth, the delivery went smoothly, and I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. During my hospital stay, not only my husband but also my sister and her family visited me almost every day. After I was discharged, they even came to my house to help with the housework. My sister's child, who just started middle school and wants to be a childcare worker in the future, said, "Cute," many times while looking at the baby, so I let her hold him until she was satisfied. Seeing our children interact fulfilled a dream I had since I was a child, and I felt incredibly happy. I'm sure my sister felt the same way. Watching our children together, her eyes seemed kinder than ever before. After my maternity leave ended, I was able to return to work, which I love. However, I couldn't work all day like before, and until my child grows up a bit, working about 3 hours a day was the limit. The stress after childbirth was nothing compared to the harassment I received from my mother-in-law during pregnancy. I didn't feel much irritation towards my long-awaited child and was able to interact with him in a relaxed manner. About 2 years later, we found out that a second child was growing in my belly. While we eagerly awaited the pregnancy with our son, it was not the same this time. Of course, we wanted to have another child, but we were able to take our time with family planning while discussing it as a couple, so perhaps that's why the stork brought a baby to us. Our son, although still small, was delighted at the prospect of having a younger brother or sister and would stroke my belly every day. As a family, we are all looking forward to meeting our new family member and spending each day happily in anticipation.